Okay, perfect. Well, hello and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, Digital Product Passports 101, How Apparel Brands Should Prepare. My name's Callum. I head up business development at Edge Comply. And for those of you who are not familiar with us, we're a product compliance partner who specialize in helping brands navigate regulations and ensure their products are compliant for sale in their target markets. Today, we're going to make digital product passports, or DPPs for short, practical for apparel brands. So what they are, where they sit in the wider regulatory landscape, when the requirements are likely to affect apparel, and what your business can start doing now. So the key point from the outset is that this is a sort of compliance readiness discussion, not simply a conversation about putting a QR code on a garment. The visible code is only the access point. The real work is really creating and maintaining the trusted product information behind it. So we'll keep this focused on the questions apparel teams are asking now, and we'll finish with time for the pre-submitted questions that some of you gave us. With me on the call today is Lewis Collentine. Lewis is a specialist in consumer product safety and advises brands launching products in the UK and EU markets. Previously led compliance at TK Maxx and is currently a market regulator for trading standards and the lead officer for product safety at CTSI, which is the national body for trading standards professionals. We'll work through 6 parts. So firstly, I'll explain what a digital product passport actually is, and then we'll kind of place it within the wider EU regulatory framework. Thirdly, we'll look at the expected timing for apparel specifically, and then consider the types of data that are likely to be required. We'll then turn that into practical preparation steps for you. And finally, as I mentioned, move into those pre-submitted questions that were submitted in advance of today's session. So the preparation section is probably the most valuable part of this. We don't yet have every final rule, but businesses can already begin the sort of slower background work of locating data, improving its quality, engaging suppliers, assigning ownership internally, etc. So first off, what is a digital product passport? So as I mentioned, it's a structured digital record of information about a product. So it's normally accessed through a data carrier on the product or its label. So that could be a QR code, NFC tag, or similar technology. So the distinction on this slide is quite important. The carrier isn't the passport. So the code or the tag is simply the doorway. The passport is the trusted, maintained product record behind that door. So that record needs to be accurate, available, and capable of being updated or governed over time. And the purpose of the DPP is twofold, really. So it should help consumers make better informed choices, and it should help regulators verify that products meet the relevant requirements. So different users may therefore see different information when they access it. So a consumer might see origin, materials, care instructions, selected sustainability information, but a regulator might need evidence of compliance. A recycler might need detailed composition and end-of-life information so the product can be handled correctly. So yeah, a DPP shouldn't be treated as a kind of marketing badge. It's fundamentally a compliance and product information tool. So marketing teams may use some of the information, but the underlying record has to be governed with the same care as other compliance data. Now, digital product passport sits within a much wider EU rulebook. So for apparel, the main route is the Eco Design for Sustainable Products regulation, usually shortened to ESPR. So ESPR came into force in July 2024, but it establishes the overall framework rather than giving us every product-specific requirement on day one. The detailed rules for individual product groups are still being written. DPPs also appear in other areas of EU product law. So batteries have their own regulatory route. The same concept is used in the new toy safety framework. Apparel comes through ESPR. So that's the framework apparel brands should be following most closely. Geography is also quite important. So the practical test is where the product is placed on the market not where the brand has its head office. The requirement applies to products sold within the European Union, which for a UK and Ireland audience includes the Republic of Ireland, because that's it's because of its particular trading arrangements, Northern Ireland as well. So it doesn't apply to Great Britain in the same way. Also means that it's not an issue for brands headquartered not only an issue for brands headquartered in the EU, sorry. So a brand based anywhere in the world can be affected if it sells relevant products into the EU market, and its suppliers may be drawn into the data gathering process wherever those suppliers are located. Now, let's sort of turn to timing. So textiles and apparel are the #1 priority in the EU's list of product groups being prioritized for DPPs. The current expectation is that the specific apparel rules will be published in 2027, so next year. Once those rules are published, brands would typically expect a transition period of at least 18 months before they have to comply. Because the delegated rules haven't been finalized yet, late 2028 or sometime during 2029, we think should be treated as a realistic planning window, but not as a sort of fixed legal deadline. I mean, Lewis, does that kind of tie in with what you're hearing on when to expect?
Yeah, very much. The kind of minimum, excuse me, the minimum that's written into the main regulation is an 18-month, as you've mentioned, transition period. So, my best guess would be early 2029 is the more realistic of the two, but let's wait and see when next year we get that all important detail that we're all waiting for.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, think of late 2028, 2029. So yeah, there's time to prepare, but that shouldn't create complacency. Supplier data collection can take months, in some cases more than a year. So the legal deadline might look like it's quite far in the distance, but the work kind of needs to be done to reach reliable data readiness. And yeah, that process can be a lot slower than teams often expect. So for apparel businesses, the clearest way to think about scope is by product category and by destination market. So textiles and apparel are first in line on the EU's Digital Product Passport priority list. So apparel and textile products sold into the EU market should be treated as the immediate focus. Footwear and leather are expected to follow later, but there's not yet a kind of firm implementation date. 2023 has been indicated as a possible time frame. I mean, again, Lewis, on sort of timelines and what's in scope, what isn't. I mean, does 2030 sound like the right kind of period to be looking at?
I think at the earliest, the EU's current working plan runs until 2030. So before then, we'd expect them to write their plan for 2030 to 2035. So I'd expect it to be in the early part of that time period.
Okay, great. And then in terms of the products that aren't in scope, I know you mentioned that you had a little bit to say on this.
Yeah, for sure. So we've already mentioned that products being sold just in Great Britain won't have to comply, whereas those in Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland will do. There's also talk of smart textiles and e-textiles, so any that have certain smart features. So that could be things like reflective features. E-textiles is ones that maybe have built-in warming functions or cooling functions that we see, particularly online. And then PPE, including PPE apparel, is out of scope. That's not to say it won't come in the future, but definitely out of scope. So really think of products like your t-shirts, shirts, trousers, jackets, underwear, kind of textile accessories. Those are the kind of product categories we're expecting to be in scope.
Okay, perfect. I know we had a couple of questions about PPE, so hopefully that's answered those. We'll get to them in a bit more detail later on. But yeah, so that sort of covers the scope. I mean, down at the bottom here, I guess, again, to reiterate, the key message is not to treat the DPP as a kind of late stage labeling exercise. should be approached as a cross-functional product data project. And it will involve teams like product development, sourcing, supplier management, compliance, technology, marketing, and potentially others right from the outset. Now, the final list of required apparel data hasn't been published yet. So we're going to be careful not to present a predicted list as if it's settled law, but industry pilots have identified roughly 120 possible data points for DPPs in general. The final apparel requirement will probably be a lot smaller than that, expected to be no more than 49. But the categories on this slide give a practical indication of the information brands might need to organize. So the first category, the yellow one here, is product identity. So information such as SKU, model, batch, supplier, identifiers. The second one, material composition, including fiber content, trims, potentially substances of concern. Third one is supply chain information, manufacturing sites, evidence of chain of custody. And then we've got compliance evidence, that's your declarations, tests, certificates, care and circularity, impact indicators like carbon footprint and recycled content. So again, not every user is going to necessarily see every data field. As we discussed earlier, consumers, regulators, and recyclers might have different views or access rights, but the business is still going to need a controlled source of truth between those views, or rather behind those views. So the useful question isn't really what does the QR code look like? The better questions are where does the information live? Who owns the field? How current is it? What evidence is there to support it? Can businesses trust it at product level? I mean, on these I know we're going to talk about it a little bit more later because there's a couple of questions on it, Lewis, but do you have anything to add on kind of different types of information?
Sure, yeah. So just to call out a couple of different points. So the approximately 49, this comes from a report that we got in late May. It's published by an EU project group called the JRC, and they have mapped out up to 49 data points for textiles that they're recommending to the EU. But they have indicated that they think some of them should be voluntary. So we do think the real number will end up being less than 49. And under material composition, where we talk about substances of concern, this is a concept we've recently had under packaging law, PPWR. It will include things like substances of very high concern, SVHCs, which, as a reminder, is that 250 odd chemical substances that regulators are concerned can harm humans and the environment. So information about whether those are intentionally added to your apparel is likely to be one of the data points for apparel and textiles.
Okay, great one to look out for. So moving on, for most brands, the challenge is not that every piece of information is absent. The challenge is that the information that you do have, if you have most of it, is probably very fragmented. So some of it is going to be sitting in spreadsheets, some of it's in email chains, some of it is in product lifecycle management systems, ERP, some of it in supplier portals, and some only in individual people's inboxes or local folders. Lewis, I don't know, have you got anything to kind of, you'll be better to talk this through in terms of how to get all of that together than I will.
Yeah, I think that the insight that I've seen from early conversations with brands is that they do have fairly ready access to about 60 to 80% of these expected data points. So it's kind of like that Pareto principle of 80-20. The 80 is probably easy, and it's probably the 20% that you're going to need to do some kind of deeper work to get the visibility of in your supply chain and engage with suppliers and sub-suppliers. So things like carbon footprint, for example, that's the 20% that's going to be the most difficult.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, essentially pulling those fragments into reliable product records is going to be the hard part. So yeah, you're going to have to go through, identify duplicates, inconsistent terms, outdated versions, missing evidence, etc., etc. And there's also going to be genuine gaps. So Those gaps, if they are there, might not be able to be solved only through an internal data cleanup exercise. They're going to require collaboration with your suppliers. So brands are going to need to ask suppliers for information they don't currently collect. So agree formats and definitions, check the evidence, build a repeatable process of keeping the data current. So yeah, this is why software shouldn't be the first and only answer. A platform can help with this, but the business first needs clarity about data ownership, data quality, and the process by which information is obtained and verified. Now, in terms of where do we actually start, we've come up with sort of 7 practical moves that businesses can begin now without waiting for the final delegated rules to come out. So first of all, we would recommend creating a simple matrix to track data collection and progress. So essentially list the product information you already have, identify gaps, and record who's responsible for filling them. So this gives you a clear view of readiness and makes progress easier to manage. Secondly, map out where your existing product information lives and who owns it. So look across your systems, spreadsheets, files, teams. Record not only where each data field is stored, but also who creates it, approved it, and keeps it up to date. Liz, talking to suppliers, I've mentioned this a few times, but yeah, do you have, I mean, I've said start talking to them now, but in terms of what kind of conversations you should be having now?
Definitely. We're seeing this for digital product passports, for packaging and some other EU regulations. It's about having conversations with suppliers, to start having those now, because you're going to get a little bit of resistance at first. People will have various concerns about sharing information with you. How much time is this going to take? What kind of cost impact might there be? So start the conversations now. Maybe pick selected suppliers or selected products from your range, and kind of get some early wins, learn some lessons, and then expand to other suppliers or other product ranges.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So start small, learn lessons, scale it up. But yeah, so the next thing on here is create, repair, and end of life content. So that essentially we mean consider what customers will need to know about caring for. So repairing, reusing, recycling, or responsibly disposing of a product. Some of this information might already exist, but it might need to be brought together and presented more clearly. Then explore platforms. So we would recommend starting to actively evaluate platform providers that can help manage traceability and DPP data, and can offer a more scalable way to collect supplier data, connect product information, and prepare for passport requirements. So use discovery calls for requests for information, compare capabilities, integration needs, implementation support, cost, and yeah, build a kind of short list, identify the right partner for your business moving forward. Then add the QR codes, so actually getting them onto your labels. So consider how they could be added to the labels. Think about where the code would appear, how it would fit into existing labeling processes, and how it would remain connected to the correct product information throughout the product's life. And then finally, keep track of EU developments, but don't wait for perfect information before starting. The details are going to continue to evolve, and your approach can be refined as the rules land. So the foundational work, tracking progress, mapping data, engaging suppliers, preparing content, exploring platforms, considering QR codes, will remain valuable, whichever final requirements are selected. And then finally, we'll deal with 4 misconceptions or myths and truths, as I've put it here. So the first myth is that, I've mentioned this a few times, but just to reiterate, the first myth is that the DPP is just a QR code on a label. Again, the truth is that the QR code is the easy part. It's the collection, organization, validation, and maintenance of the data behind the QR code that is the real work. Second myth is that businesses can wait until next year, 2027. Truth is, again, 2027 is when we expect greater clarity on the rules, not necessarily when the full obligation takes effect. So implementation is more likely to be around late 2028, 2029. But the data preparation, again, can take far longer than the compliance window suggests. So you should start planning now. Thirdly, DPPs only affect EU brands. Truth is that the rules are driven by products sold in the EU. So a brand can be headquartered elsewhere and still be affected. Suppliers around the world might need to provide the supporting data. And then fourthly, lastly, that the DPP replaces existing product labels. Truth is that they're expected to sit alongside them. So brands still are likely going to need existing care, fiber content, other mandatory labels, unless those underlying rules change. So as you consider these, ask which of these four is most common inside your organization, and that answer often reveals where first internal education work needs to start happening. So to kind of close the main presentation, two messages to remember. Firstly, DPP is a compliance data system, not simply a QR code or marketing badge. Secondly, businesses don't need to wait for every final apparel rule before starting the prep work. Again, expected timeline gives brands room to prepare, but it's going to take time. So start small, start now, talk to suppliers, map the information you already hold, identify gaps, test a pilot, and start looking at platforms and service providers. So I will share this after the session along with some other stuff, but for a practical UK apparel example, the Nobody's Child playbook is freely available and provides a useful early adopter case study. As I say, I'll be getting in touch with all of you to share that and some other things over the next 24 hours. So we'll move on now to the pre-submitted questions. So I'm going to be throwing a few of these at you, Lewis. And yeah, we'll kind of take them in different groups. So
sounds good.
Just to start off, we had a few questions around timing and kind of when things come into effect. And I think we can, I mean, as much as we covered it off a bit earlier, we'll kind of take them together. So again, this one's from Richard. When does a UK-based business need to have implemented the DPP by?
Great. So in terms of the UK, we've said that they don't strictly fall under the digital product passport requirements. However, if they're a UK business that is selling or supplying or somewhere in that supply chain into the EU, then they will have to kind of follow along with the timelines we've mentioned. So we'll get the detail in 2027, and then the earliest it will implement is late 2028. Early 2029. It is worth saying that the UK has been exploring what's called digital labelling. So this is for some product types like toys, it's being explored, but this is different to digital product passports, and it's mainly being explored as a voluntary option. So giving businesses the option to display some information through digital means, but no word formally that digital product passports will be coming to Great Britain. Although ever since Brexit, we have seen the UK often follows the EU 2 or 3 years later. So it wouldn't surprise me if it does come down the line at some point, but no word at the moment.
Okay, perfect. And then we had one from Sean. Is there a defined date for implementation? We've just covered that. And will there be an adoption period or grace period? Obviously, this relates to the 18-month window that you were talking about earlier, correct?
That's right. Minimum of 18 months from when we get that detail. So there will be time, but as we keep emphasizing, don't wait until then. It's best to start something now.
Okay, perfect. We had a couple of questions more around the scope of the regulation and what products are going to be covered by it. So, I mean, there's two that are quite related. Well, I'll read both of them out because I think they can probably be answered together. So we had one from Ruth, which was, are there any rules regarding backdated stock for example, stock already produced and sitting in warehouses? Does this need to be reprocessed with QR codes added? And then Nick was asking, does the DPP only apply to newly manufactured products, or do we need to also do this for existing products?
So this is mostly good news. The DPP rules will only apply to product types that are within scope that we've touched on, and it will apply to batches of those products that are imported or sold on the EU market after it comes into force, late 2028, 2029. Now, that includes any existing products that you continue to import after that date. So if, for example, you have a seasonal range that, straddles both sides of the timeline, or if you have any never out of stock products that you sell all year round, those newer batches will be within scope. But if you already have batches of stock on the market in the EU, before that date, you can sell through them. We're not expecting any kind of need to sell through them rapidly.
Okay, that is mostly good news for most people, I think. And then we had another question again on scope from Lise. So she was asking, from my learnings so far, PPE appears to be exempt. Yeah, from the 2027 deadline. Does the scope include PPE clothing?
So what we understand at the moment is that it's very, very likely that PPE will be excluded. That's what is being said repeatedly. So it will be excluded entirely from the textile DPP scope. That's both PPE clothing, but other PPE products as well. They are likely to follow, probably in that 2030 to 2035 date range.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, not in the initial scope, but probably in the future.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then there were a few questions more on the kind of logistical side that I think we'll take one by one. So Amanda asked, how do we instigate QR codes on care labels?
Okay, so this is kind of like getting down to the practicals of it, isn't it? So let me just find my notes on this one, because I did jot down a couple of good things. Here we go. Okay, so first step I would say is picking your data carrier. So we've mentioned QR codes quite a bit, but we've also mentioned NFC, near field communication. The rules are going to require a QR code that links to a URL of some sort. There's a popular one from the company GS1. You might know them as the barcode people. They have one called Digital Link. So if you already use barcodes and GTIN codes, then they might be a good option for you. So you'll generate your codes. We expect those codes will be generated per batch of a product, because some of the DPP data points talk about batch IDs. You'll link that code to your DPP record on your chosen DPP platform, and then it's a case of printing them. So we're yet to see the detail, but my understanding is that it will probably need to be on the product itself. So for example, a sewn-in label, because the idea is it's meant to be with a product through its whole life. So although some websites are talking about it being on swing tags, I'm just not sure that would meet what the legislation is going after. So probably printing on the sewn-in label. It needs to be a minimum size of about 1 centimeter, ideally 1.5 centimeters, so it can be read by kind of all people's smartphone cameras. And a key point is it must be durable enough to survive the life of the product. So we're talking about, it can't fall off, the ink can't wash out, think of rubbing against the skin over many, many years of use. So it's really important that it's durable.
Okay. And then relatedly, Alison was asking if having RFID tagging in play across inventory will help retailers be DPP ready.
So I smile because RFID tags can be helpful, but they can also be really tricky. So my understanding is that RFID tags themselves won't be kind of accepted as a data carrier. There is some talk about trying to make them, but some researchers found that actually they don't function because on most people's phones, we can't read RFID tags. We can read NFC and we can scan a QR code. So I'm not sure RFID alone is going to be accepted. They are helpful if you want item level data and you're willing to put infrastructure in your warehouses and in your suppliers so that you can track those items through your supply chain. But the main reason I smiled was because I think RFID tags are going to cause problems, because almost all RFID tags on the market at the moment have a chip, which is electrical, has some metal components. Even the company, I think it's Pulpatronics, that have developed a more eco one, their main one does still have a chip in it. So when it actually comes to end of life of the product, that's going to make it more difficult to recycle, dispose of that, especially if it's on the swing tag, because under packaging laws, swing tags are considered packaging. So if you're putting metal into a swing tag, that swing tag needs to be recyclable from 2030. So I think RFID tags could cause a number of challenges, but they might have a role to play in your supply chain.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Lewis. And then we had a question from Khalid about farm level data. So I guess this is about going really far back in the supply chain. So how do you deal with data from the farm for natural fibers?
Yes, so this one's tricky, and I had to get some input from an ESG consultant because it went a little bit beyond my expertise, but I'll start with the bits that I do know and then I'll read out the advice they've given me. So we're really talking here about how deep you go into your supply chain and things like chain of custody. So in terms of the specific data points, there's a few where this could be relevant. So the first one is country of origin. It's looking like country of origin will be focused on the finished product and maybe where it's assembled. So which country those two actions have spoken about. There's some talk about going deeper. So, you know, where's the yarn from? Where's the fabric from? And then the yarn, so tiers 2 and 3. But the JRC group, that EU group that I mentioned in their report from May, they've acknowledged that that data is going to be quite tricky and isn't always accessible to brands. So my instinct is that that either won't be a requirement or they'll introduce it further down the line to give businesses a chance. If I just read out the bit from our ESG consultant, they've said the other data points are recycled content, organic content, and carbon footprint. That's where knowing farm level data might come into play. They've said for carbon footprint, there's a method called PEFCR. That's PEFCR. It's widely available for apparel and footwear. And that talks about primary and secondary data sets, averaging, etc. In other words, you may not need to worry too much about farm level data, but ultimately, until they finalize the details, we're not going to know for sure. Yeah. So a bit of a long answer in a bit of the granular detail there, because this is a tricky question.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And then we had another question from Lise about tech packs. So when setting up tech packs, would we have to pack per color? Sorry, would we have to have a pack per colorway, or can it be per style?
So I know brands use tech packs in slightly different contexts, so I'll answer it slightly differently. DPP, most of the data is at product level. And so by that we mean product SKU. So that's kind of red t-shirt is different from blue t-shirt. But some of the data that's needed for DPP is a level deeper. It's about batch level data. How you go about organizing that in your paperwork around compliance paperwork, etc., is up to you. But that's the level of granularity that we're probably looking at.
Okay, perfect. And then we had one from Tessa around differing requirements across regions. I guess this, my understanding would be it applies within the EU the same across all of the member states, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So these will be applied consistently across the countries. There might be different levels of enforcement. And wherever your suppliers are in the world, if they are supplying product for the EU market, then they have a role to play. But in today's session, we're not covering other markets. We're just focusing about the EU DPP.
Cool. And then there were a couple of questions more on the kind of recommendations, or asking us for recommendations on different things. So one of them was from Oliver. And I guess we kind of touched on this in our checklist and what to get started on now. But what would be your recommended phased approach between now and 2028?
Yeah, I think our phase practical steps would be the thing that I'd suggest, but I'd emphasize that picking certain product types from your range, if you have a real wide range of apparel and accessories, or focusing on either your biggest suppliers or maybe suppliers that you know supply to other EU brands or sellers, because they're more likely to be up for this and aware of it. But yeah, I think your practical step slide was probably the best steer for this question.
Okay, perfect. And Claudia was asking around, obviously we mentioned earlier talking to suppliers and technology providers. I mean, would there be any platforms that you've heard of or would recommend potentially?
Yeah, potentially. So the thing to know is that only recently have the standards been published, and I think in fact it was this week that the standards around things like the platforms, the data, the digital carriers have only just been harmonised at EU level this week, I believe. So there are some platforms out there that are mega prepared, but there are also some online that are promising lots of things that they can't possibly be confident they can deliver just yet. So a word of warning on this. I'll name some of the big players. So I've mentioned GS1 already, the barcode people. You've got other big players like Trust Trace and Fairly Made that have been doing lots of work in this space, and they've been helping some of those early adopters like Nobody's Child, the brand that we mentioned or that you mentioned earlier. So those are some of the big reputable players, but be really careful. There are lots of kind of online only companies that no one's ever heard of and don't have any kind of history in this space that are popping up online promising the world, and I'm not so convinced by them.
Okay, word of warning. And then we've just got a final couple of questions. So we had one from Sorab. So this is quite long-winded. I'll just read. I'll read it word for word. So at the moment, brands are already maintaining the COO mid barcodes, HS codes, and then the product details. Will the DPP replace all these documents? If yes, then do the manufacturer and the brand still have to fill up some other information online to generate DPP? And is it being done on individual garment level or on shipment level?
Yes. So I might ask you to bring up, I think we've got a slightly more detailed slide about what's likely to be the data points. So if you don't mind popping that up.
Yeah, I will bring this up now.
Just while you're doing that, I shared the stat earlier that about 60 to 80% of the data points brands that I'm speaking to seem to have either like available already or with a simple ask of one person or one supplier. So there's definitely some gaps in the document. The DPP will be bringing together lots of these bits of information and document that was mentioned. So things like country of origin, things like HS commodity codes. Yeah, so this is a slightly more extended list. Let me just call out a few things that aren't on the list that was submitted by Sorab. So in the middle section, we've got substances of concern. I touched on these earlier, things like SVHCs. There's a robustness score. So well, a proposed robustness score. So this is things like after you've washed a product, how much does it affect the appearance? How much shrinkage is there? How much is the yarn kind of affected by torque, etc. So that's something not on the list. And I feel like there was another one I was going to call out. Yeah, carbon footprint, and that's the acronym that I mentioned earlier, PEFCR method as well. So to kind of summarize the question, it's bringing together some of the information you have already. It's gathering new bits of information that you won't already have. And it's being done a mixture of product level and then a little bit of per batch. So things like batch ID will be per batch.
Okay, perfect. And then we just had one final question, and I need to bring up the thing I had. I've lost it because
I
I've
made you
changed,
switch screens,
slides.
sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. I've got it now. So finally, we had one from Paul. What does all of this mean for regulators, and how can we assist local businesses?
Great question, and hello to a fellow regulator as well. We walk amongst you. So yeah, I think it's a great question. It's two parts, isn't it? So what does it mean for regulators? Obviously, regulators in Great Britain, it won't impact us from an enforcement point of view. It would just be colleagues on the island of Ireland and over in the EU. We're going to see it start to bite at the customs border. So DPP will have something called a central registry of DPPs, which has kind of things like your product code and the URL. And then you'll actually host your DPP on a platform provider's site, and they'll give you a URL. So that'll be your detailed DPP. So at customs, part of customs checks will routinely be scanning and making sure something is on that central registry. So that's what it will look like for regulators. In terms of assisting businesses, even those of us that work in Great Britain, you know, many of the businesses we work with are selling into Ireland and the EU. So I think recommend that businesses you speak to go on webinars like this and start to learn some of the basics. Recommend they check out things like the JRC report that I think Callum can share afterwards, and the Nobody's Child playbook. That is fantastic. I've looked at that so many times. They were real early adopters, and to be honest, they probably helped legislators and regulators because they have learnt some lessons as they've gone along, which they're teaching all of us now. So yeah, attend some good webinars, have a look at the detail in the JRC draft document, and have a look at the Nobody's Child playbook. They would be some of my top tips.
Okay, perfect. Now I know we've got a couple of hands up. We're not going to open this up to like a live Q&A session, but I can get it. I'll be in touch with all of you after the webinar, and we can, you know, if there are any additional questions or anything, we can certainly talk that through with you. So that's the end of our pre-submitted questions. Brings us to the end of the webinar. So thank you very much for everybody for coming along. I hope this has been useful and it's cleared up more questions than created new ones. But yeah, as I said, I will be in touch with all of you afterwards to share some information that I think will be useful. We've mentioned most of it throughout the webinar today. And yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much to Lewis, as always, for adding his expertise to my limited understanding in comparison, a mere mortal in the compliance space. But just as a final point, we are going to be running a few of these over the next few months, either on specific regulations like the DPP or more broad topics. Our next session is on July the 30th, and we're going to do it on the PPWR, which is coming into force pretty soon. So yeah, if anybody would be interested in that, you can sign up. I'll be in touch with information around that as well. But yes, thank you very much to everyone, and have a lovely Thursday afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lily.